Well, Deacon Daniel Galadza, thanks so much for joining us again on Zhyve TV.
My pleasure, Julian.
I'm curious about a service that I think might be mysterious to a lot of Ukrainian Greek Catholics. Doesn't happen everywhere, but where it does, it happens usually on Saturday nights, but not only Saturday nights. And, well, I'm going to reveal the mystery. Vespers. What is Vespers? What does it mean? What does it do?
I like how you introduced that, mysterious but revealing the mystery. That's right.
I'm not empowered to do that, but maybe you can get us closer.
Well, I'll try. So Vespers is the evening worship of the Church. It's not just Byzantine or Eastern Catholic. Vespers is also prayed by Western Christians, so Roman Catholics have Vespers as well.
A lot of Franciscans like it, for example.
Okay. Benedictines.
Benedictines, actually, yeah.
It's part of the Liturgy of the Hours, perhaps a term people know. So the cycle of daily prayer, and technically it begins the day in the Eastern traditions, and which harkens back to Genesis, that the creation of the world, there was evening and there was morning, a new day, so the day begins with the evening. So it's the evening prayer of the Church, and it begins the liturgical day, so to speak. So every day, without fail, there's Vespers every day. You might think that every day there's Divine Liturgy, but there's actually Vespers more often throughout the year than Divine Liturgy.
Why should people go? What is it about Vespers that is important? I think you hinted at it when you said that happens every day.
That's right. So, well, why should people go? Why should people do anything? I'd say, in this case, if you're a Christian, it's worth it because it's a preparation for receiving the Eucharist on the one hand, but at the same time, it's just a constant reminder of the presence of God at all times and at all seasons in our life. And it's something that, whether it was in the Old Testament or even today, Jewish people pray at various times of the day. It's biblical. Christ prayed at various times of the day. Early Christians would pray in various texts 3 times a day, the Our Father.
I think some people are familiar with Muslims that pray 6 times a day.
That's right. Exactly. So it's a constant reminder of the presence of God, and Vespers is kind of just one of those elements in the day. St. Paul encourages us to pray without ceasing. This is one way, a common prayer that the Church gathers together to glorify God, to highlight various themes that occur during the day, thanksgiving for the day that is past, thanking Christ for the day that will come, for the light that shines in darkness.
I think some people are familiar in the Divine Liturgy where a lot of the offering has to do with the bread and the wine, and that's kind of what people bring into the day, kind of the beginning of the day, although Vespers is the beginning of the day, but the beginning of the calendar day, let's say.
The work day.
The work day, before they break their fast. And the emphasis of Vespers is a little different. You mentioned emphasis on light. What are some of the kind of undertones of Vespers that people, when they go, have in mind?
That's right. Okay, so you mentioned that Vespers is something that we might know about from Saturday night or maybe the eves of feast days, but it's something that also takes place every day. So the things that are common regardless of the time of the year or the solemnity being celebrated, being prepared for, are Psalm 140, which talks about, let my prayer arise like incense before you, the lifting up of my hands as an evening sacrifice. So
very physical.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah, that's something that unfortunately we sometimes lose touch with. We think that, there's say the black, do the red, just get it done, valid, licit,
As in follow the book as it's formatted.
Exactly. And then all the other things like, if incense or candles or light or darkness or different types of melodies or even visual like icons or different colors of the vestments of the liturgical year are kind of all optional. Well, yeah, so in the catacombs and in the time of persecution of our church, that wasn't possible. So you kind of have to focus on the bare minimums or the essential, but all these other kind of the experience of the senses in worship is something very important. So yeah, incense or raising one's hands is emphasized in the Psalms, or crying out to God. Like, it's kind of like, I don't know, I really like the image of Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof, kind of like, yelling at God, complaining, talking with God, and that's what the Psalms do. And Vespers, apart from Psalm 140, 141, 129, 116. Yeah, exactly. It's that's the Psalter is basically the handbook of Christian prayer. And on Saturday evening, we start with Psalm 1 as the variable part of the Psalter. It happens probably, maybe, depends on how you sing, probably 5 minutes into the service after the Great Litany. And Psalm 1, that gives us a key to understanding the whole Psalter and our whole worship. It begins, "Blessed is the man who walks not on the counsel of the wicked." And that man that we're talking about is Christ. He gives us the example, the model for our worship, the one we're supposed to follow.
It happens every day. Vespers does, as you mentioned, but we've also talked a little bit about, we mentioned about the calendar. Is there something you're missing when you're not going to Vespers? Because you go through the calendar and you experience the cycle of the year, which you might not get just on Sundays, where the movable parts are very short. You get 2 paragraphs effectively every Sunday that tell you it's a different time of the year, but at a Vespers, every day has different parts. It's a different service almost every time.
Exactly, yeah. So apart from these themes of sacrifice of praise, raising our hands in worship of God, incense, or the very important theme of light, Christ as the tranquil or joyful light that illumines the darkness. We
Singing
sing
at
this hymn.
sunset.
Exactly, yeah.
Vespers happens at sunset, and so you're ushering in the light.
Exactly.
And lighting candles.
As it gets darker, the church radiates with this light, whether it's with the candles and the lamps that are lit or with this joyful praise. Apart from the Psalms, what a lot of fathers and mothers of the church would do in the early centuries, particularly under monastic influence, would be to write basically poetry. That we don't really see it as poetry because we get it through various stages of translation. It was Greek poetry, oftentimes originating in what is today the Middle East, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, or Greece, and modern-day Turkey, so Constantinople, where they would highlight themes from the scriptures that were celebrating the mystery of Christ's passion, death, burial, and resurrection, and write about this in poetry, and then sing it. And so that's what we have, is what we call stihira, or troparia, or kondakia, or irmose from the canons. And so what they would do is take the Psalms, and then in between the Psalm verses, insert these hymns that we sing, particularly in Vespers, and the theme of these hymns changes. So there's a book called the Oktoyich, or Oktoyichos, which is the book of the 8 tones. So
8 different melodies that we sing throughout the year. Yeah,
and I'm not going to get into it. For us, we consider them to be melodies, but in the Greek system, it would be modes, so kind of different scales that even express certain themes and emotions in their own right.
People sense emotion in music. Happy music, sad music.
Oh, definitely,
so you
yeah.
kind of get that.
Yeah,
And,
Ukrainians love Greek Catholics. I heard the favorite song is Vichnaya Pamyat, minor.
Eternal memory.
Exactly, that's right. But so with these hymns, their texts express various themes. On Saturday evening, it'll be about the resurrection, but not just the resurrection, also the passion and death of Christ, the cross that leads us. Yeah, oh, definitely. Oh, yeah. And then also there will be, every day of the year has some kind of commemoration of a saint or an event, whether the life of Christ or the Mother of God or various saints. And so these hymns are glorification of God, thanksgiving to God for these examples in our own lives, but also in a way pedagogical and didactic. They tell us something about the feast. So you asked, what do you miss if you don't go? Well, you will learn a lot more about these saints that we're commemorating, and sometimes if it's a greater commemoration, there will also be extra scriptural readings from the Old Testament. So very often people say, oh, well, in the Roman Catholic Church, after the Second Vatican Council, they reintroduced a kind of fuller cycle of reading of Scripture, so added Old Testament readings where they might not have been present before. And people are saying, well, what about us? Why don't we do that? And there have been discussions about that, but the one quick solution is, well, come to Vespers on the eve of the feast, and you'll hear those Old Testament readings that allude, that are foreshadowing these images, types of what we'll hear about the next day at Divine Liturgy.
Yeah, you get most of the Bible there.
Yeah.
So you bought some books.
That's right.
Show us what we got here in terms of what people can read to learn a little bit more about Vespers.
Yeah, so there's a pretty good book here by Father Robert Taft. It's actually award-winning. It won some kind of Catholic award, I think, in the 80s or 90s. Father Robert Taft was a Byzantine Rite Jesuit who was a specialist in liturgy, and this book, The Liturgy of the Hours in East and West, gives a historical and theological explanation of where the worship of our church comes from, not just our own Byzantine tradition, but also early, even the Jewish roots and the biblical roots of our worship, and then all the different Eastern Christian and sometimes, well, and Western traditions. So if you have a, I don't know, Ethiopian Orthodox or a Melkite Greek Catholic or a Syro-Malabar church in your neighborhood, you can read this book and figure out what they're doing when it's not the Mass or the Qurbana or the Divine Liturgy or whatever
different
it
names
is.
of different services.
Exactly,
That's super cool.
Yeah. So this is a kind of a more historical, technical book, and I would highly recommend this book by Father Alexander Schmemann, who was a theologian in the 20th century at St. Vladimir's Seminary in New York. It's called For the Life of the World, and really, it actually doesn't deal specifically or exclusively with Vespers. Vespers is just one chapter, and he kind of gives a theological presentation. One of the possible ways of interpreting Vespers as a journey following Adam from the fall, from the Garden of Eden, paradise, the fall, and then the coming of Christ, the restoration of humankind. So I think there are a lot of other chapters in this book as well that will be of interest.
Excellent. Well, Deacon Daniel, thanks so much for sharing us. Well, Deacon Daniel, thank you so much for sharing these books with us and joining us today in the studio on Zhyve TV.
My pleasure, Julian. Thank you.